AMD messed up big time. In 2022, they released a CPU that was so incredible for gaming that it made most other CPUs at the time irrelevant. If you were looking to build a high-end gaming PC, then hands down this was the way to go. And all for a very competitive MSRP of $449. Today, you can get the CPU for about $300 brand new, and even cheaper if you wait for it to go on sale. So, what CPU is it? It's the Ryzen 7 5800X3D. This CPU has 8 cores and 16 threads, boosts up to 4.5 GHz, and has 96 MB of L3 cache, which is almost triple the 5800X non-3D. You may be asking, why am I talking about this last gen processor? Didn't AMD release the AM5 platform as well as the Ryzen 7000 CPUs? Yes, they did, but the problem is, when it comes to gaming performance, you're able to get more FPS at a lower overall cost by using this last gen 5800X3D. So let's compare what each of these options would look like. I spec'd out 3 systems. On the left is this one with the 5800X3D, in the middle is the price equivalent option with the 7600X, and on the right is a core equivalent option with the 7700X. As we can see, because of the higher platform costs associated with AM5, you'll have to drop down to a 6-core 7600X in order to match the same price. And since the 5800X3D has AMD's V-Cache, it provides the same, if not better, performance in many titles at 1080p. Now, this isn't an apples to apples comparison. On the one hand, the AM4 platform is on its way out, with AM5 just being released and AMD promising new CPUs until at least 2025. But, on the other hand, if you're not the biggest fan of future-proofing and you want the best gaming performance right now and at a reasonable price, then the 5800X3D is the way to go. A big point I'm trying to make here is the idea that last-gen hardware shouldn't be out of consideration just because it's last-gen. Think about iPhones. Yes, the 14 Pro Max Ultra Mega is the latest and greatest, but that title comes with a hefty price tag. For many people, the 13, 12, and even 11 would be more than enough for many years to come. So now that we're on the same page that last-gen hardware can bring the same, if not better performance at a cheaper price, we're going to be building an incredible ITX gaming PC using only last-gen parts. Just like how AMD messed up, Nvidia messed up too. The RTX 40 series is incredibly overpriced for the performance and features you're getting. The 3090, 3080, 3070, and their Ti variants are all extremely attractive options. For this build, we're going with the RTX 3080 10GB, which, in my opinion, is going to go down in history as a GPU legend, right next to the 1080 Ti. The performance is incredible, the price is tolerable, and the overall experience makes it the right choice. For the rest of the system, I'm going to be pairing the 5800X3D with this Asus B550i ITX motherboard, and 32GB of DDR4 RAM running at 3600 megabits per second. For storage, we're going with a 1TB Western Digital SN850 as the boot SSD, and a 2TB Intel 670p for additional storage. This will give us both great performance and great capacity without spending a ton of money. For the power supply, we're going with the Cooler Master V850. This is an SFX PSU with more than enough power for a system like this, and also has enough PCIe power cables for the GPU, which on SFX PSUs can sometimes be tricky to find. And we're going to be putting all these components in the Cooler Master NR200P. This is an incredible mini ITX case that takes heavy influence from some major boutique SFF brands. One great thing about it, besides its small yet well-designed layout, is the fact that it is in mass production, and that makes it cheap. So now that you know what's going in this beast, let's get to building. As with any old build, we're going to be starting with the CPU and RAM install. That is one thing I'll miss about this AM4 platform. Having the pins on the CPU was a bit nicer than the ultra delicate motherboard pins. LGA sockets do have many benefits, but there's always been the fear in the back of my mind that I'll bend some of the pins. With the CPU and RAM installed, we're going to plug in some of the power cables before we put the motherboard in the case. For ITX builds, it can be critical to think things through beforehand, because in this case, once the motherboard and power supply are installed, it would be incredibly difficult to plug in the 24-pin power connector as well as the front I/O. Speaking of which, now that the motherboard is installed, we'll plug in the front I/O as well as this additional USB-C cable for more connectivity. And then, we'll move on to installing the PSU. These SFF power supplies really are incredible. They provide so much power at such a small size. Cooler Master also just released a 1300 watt SFF PSU, which is absolutely crazy because that's over double what the average gaming computer would need. And considering the fact that the biggest ATX power supplies go up to around 1600, we're not far away from a world where only SFF PSUs are feasible. Now that our power is completed, you may have noticed that I haven't installed any SSDs yet. And that is for a good reason, and it's to show you something that I love about motherboards and cases that support this. For the top M.2 slot, it's a typical install. Unscrew, plug in, screw back in. But if you look at the back, we're able to install an M.2 drive after the motherboard is already in the case, which is an incredible feature in my opinion. This means that you can start with only a single drive, saving you money now, and then upgrade down the line as you need more space without having to take your whole system apart. With the storage now installed, we can move on to the GPU. But before we install it, we're going to be doing a little bit of cooling mod. In this Cooler Master case, we're able to fit 2 fans at the bottom that provide direct cooling to the GPU. Typically, we would be forced to use slim fans for clearance reasons, but if we remove the 3 smaller, less powerful fans on the GPU itself, we can install some beefy 30mm Fantex T30 fans to keep this 3080 chilly. And doing this will be more than worth it, since the airflow and pressure these fans provide will dominate anything the original GPU fans could have done. And by using software such as Argus Monitor, we will be able to control the fan curve of these specific fans based on the GPU's temperature directly, which typically isn't possible through just the motherboard. Speaking of fans, while we're here, let's also install the top exhaust fans. I'm going to be using these white RGB fans from Thermalright, which will not only look good in the system, but they'll add some needed lighting, and they're also the same fans that the cooler will be using. Plus, they're pretty cheap and perform surprisingly well. And speaking of the cooler, yes, we're going to be using the Thermalright Peerless Assassin. As I showed in my last build video, this cooler is just a monster for cooling, and for only 40 bucks, it really tops the charts for price to performance. So with the cooler installed, we're pretty much done. Even though we were using an SFF case, Cooler Master makes it incredibly easy to install all of your parts fast. And before we talk about how incredible this system performs, here's a little montage to show off this beautiful beast. Now, let's talk numbers. As I previously mentioned, this is using only last gen parts, which, for the uninitiated, could make it seem like it's not as good for gaming. However, the opposite is true. Running the system through the gauntlet shows us just how incredibly it performs. At both 1440p and 4K, the 3080 paired with a 5800X 3D provides an amazing gaming experience. And note that these frame rates are at the highest settings possible. If you want more performance than this, you can just adjust some settings, or even use DLSS, with the quality mode being nearly identical to typical rasterization. Moving on to the synthetic benchmarks, this build holds up real well. Cinebench R23 shows us that this CPU isn't just meant for gaming. It could easily handle professional workloads such as video editing and streaming. And with all this performance, our parts are staying cool. Under full extended load, the CPU maxes out at around 84 degrees, and our GPU stays chilly at only 74 degrees because of the 30mm fan sitting right below it. As a whole, this system has incredible performance. It looks amazing, it stays cool and quiet, and most importantly, it'll keep being that way for many years to come. I hope that this build is a testament to the fact that last gen parts should always be on your radar when you're speccing out a new build. And with that, I hope you all enjoyed yet another incredible gaming build. Stay tuned, because the next computer I'll be showing, well, let me just say, I paid less than $100 for it, and the results really surprised me. So thanks for watching, I'm Spectral Tech, and I'll see you next time.